My name is Estelle Blackwood, and at 58, I never imagined my only son would try to kill me for money. You think you know someone until the freezer door slams shut and you realize you're nothing but a dollar sign to your own flesh and blood. The strangest part, his desperate attempt to end my life became the catalyst that saved us both. Before I tell you how I survived being locked in a freezer by my own flesh and blood, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and subscribe if you want to hear how I turned the tables on my own son's betrayal. Growing up in a small town in Massachusetts, I never dreamed I would one day own a successful chain of restaurants. My journey began when I was just 22, fresh out of culinary school with nothing but determination and a handful of family recipes. I worked two jobs, saved every penny, and finally opened my first small diner called Estelle's Comfort Kitchen at 28. My husband Jack was my biggest supporter. We met when he came into my diner every morning for breakfast. He was a construction foreman with the biggest smile and the kindest heart. After 3 months of serving him the same bacon and eggs, I finally worked up the courage to write my number on his check. We were married within a year. Jack and I built our life together, brick by brick. The business expanded from one small diner to 5 upscale restaurants across the state. Our signature comfort food, with a gourmet twist, earned us features in several food magazines. I still remember the day our first major review came out. Jack bought 20 copies and handed them out to everyone we knew. Our son Trevor was born when I was 28, right as our business was taking off. From the moment he arrived, he was the center of our universe. Perhaps that was our first mistake. Trevor never wanted for anything. New toys, expensive clothes, the best schools. We gave him everything. Jack especially couldn't say no to him. "We're working so hard to build something," he'd say. "Why not let him enjoy it?" Trevor grew up handsome and charming, just like his father. He could talk his way into or out of anything. Teachers would call about missing assignments and somehow Trevor would charm them into extensions. He joined the lacrosse team in high school, not because he loved the sport, but because the coach's son threw the best parties. Trevor was always the life of those parties, according to the stories that would get back to us. College was more of the same. Trevor changed majors 3 times, took 6 years to graduate with a general business degree, and called home for money at least twice a month. Jack and I sent checks without question. We wanted to support his journey, help him find his path. When Jack was diagnosed with aggressive pancreatic cancer 7 years ago, everything changed. He fought hard for 18 months, but the disease took him anyway. I lost my husband, my partner, my best friend. Trevor lost his father, but also his most reliable source of financial support. I was heartbroken, but determined to keep our business thriving as Jack's legacy. After Jack's death, my relationship with Trevor became even more complicated. He was 23, technically an adult, but still completely dependent on me. I increased his monthly allowance, thinking it would help him through his grief. Instead, it seemed to accelerate his sense of entitlement. Trevor moved into a luxury apartment downtown, bought a sports car, and started traveling to Vegas regularly with friends. When I asked about his career plans, he'd talk vaguely about networking and finding opportunities. Meanwhile, the allowance I provided disappeared within days each month, followed by calls for more. For years, I enabled this behavior. I was guilty of trying to fill the void Jack left with money and indulgence. I couldn't bear to see Trevor unhappy, on top of losing his father. But as he approached 30 without ever holding a real job, I finally realized I wasn't helping him. I was crippling him. My home became my sanctuary after Jack died. It's a beautiful colonial on 3 acres just outside the city, with a heated pool Jack had installed the year before he got sick. The basement was converted into a professional kitchen, where I tested recipes for the restaurants. That's where we installed the commercial freezer, 8 feet wide and 6 feet deep with shelving, for bulk ingredients and test dishes. Martha has been my housekeeper for 15 years, more family than employee. She lost her husband around the same time I lost Jack, and we bonded through our grief. She lives in the guest house on my property and has a key to the main house. Robert started as a busboy at our first restaurant 20 years ago and worked his way up to operations manager for the entire chain. He's the son I wish Trevor had become: hard-working, honest, grateful for opportunities. About a year ago, I finally made the difficult decision to cut Trevor's allowance significantly. "You need to find a job," I told him over dinner at my home. "Any job, start building something for yourself." He was furious. "You have more money than you know what to do with," he shouted. "Do you know how pathetic it is to see my friends taking over their family businesses while my own mother makes me beg for scraps?" "Your friends work in their family businesses," I pointed out. "They didn't just inherit the corner office." "Dad would have wanted me to have a good life," Trevor said, playing the card he knew would hurt me most. "Your father would have wanted you to build a life you earned," I responded, though the comment stung. That was the beginning of the change in our relationship, the beginning of the path that would eventually lead us to that freezer door. Looking back, I should have seen the warning signs sooner. After I reduced his allowance, Trevor's appearances at my home became more frequent and oddly timed. He'd drop by unannounced on Tuesday afternoons or early Sunday mornings, times he knew I'd likely be alone. His demeanor changed too. He was suddenly interested in my day, my health, my business decisions, questions he'd never bothered to ask before. "You look tired, Mom," he'd say, studying my face with unusual intensity. "Are you feeling okay? You're not getting sick, are you?" At first I was touched. I thought perhaps the financial boundaries had sparked a genuine interest in my life. Now I understand he was assessing my health, my vulnerability, taking inventory of what stood between him and my money. The first major red flag appeared about 6 months after I cut his allowance. Trevor came to Sunday dinner with an urgent request. "I need $50,000, he announced while helping himself to a second serving of roast beef. "It's for an investment opportunity. Time sensitive. Big returns." When I asked for details, his explanation was vague. Something about a friend's tech startup. No business plan, no documentation, just the promise that he could triple the money in 6 months. "I'm not giving you $50,000 without more information," I said firmly. Trevor's face darkened. "You don't trust me. After all these years, you still think I'm some kind of child who can't make adult decisions." "It's not about trust," I explained. "It's about responsibility. If you want to be treated like a business partner, you need to present business proposals, not vague promises." He stormed out, slamming the door so hard that one of Jack's fishing trophies fell from the shelf and shattered. I cried as I swept up the pieces, feeling like I was failing both my husband's memory and my son. A week later, Trevor returned with a surprising question. "Mom, have you updated your will since Dad died?" The question caught me off guard. "Why would you ask that?" He shrugged, avoiding my eyes. "Just thinking about practical matters. You're not getting any younger, and the business is worth a lot now. I want to make sure everything's in order." That night, I called my longtime attorney, Susan, just to check if anyone had been inquiring about my estate. Sure enough, Trevor had called her office twice asking questions about the terms of Jack's life insurance policy, which had paid out to me, and about the structure of my will. The pieces were starting to form a disturbing picture, but I still couldn't bring myself to believe my son would actually harm me. He was entitled and lazy, yes, but dangerous. It seemed impossible. Then came the phone call I wasn't meant to hear. I was in the garden when Trevor stepped onto the patio, not realizing I was nearby, behind the rose trellis. "I know I'm late with the payment," he said in a low, urgent voice. "But I'll have the money soon, very soon. No, you don't understand. We're talking hundreds of thousands, millions potentially. Just give me 2 more weeks." When he spotted me, he quickly ended the call and plastered on a smile. "Just a friend," he said dismissively. "Work stuff." That evening, as we had dinner, Trevor began asking unusually specific questions about the restaurants. "So which location is most profitable?" Is it still the downtown one? Who handles the accounting now? Same firm as when Dad was alive. If something happened to you, is there a succession plan? Who would run things? I answered vaguely, increasingly uncomfortable with his line of questioning. The next morning, I called Robert, my operations manager. Has Trevor contacted you recently? Asked about the business. Robert hesitated before answering. He came by the downtown location yesterday asking to see the books. Said you were thinking of bringing him into the business and wanted him to understand the finances. I told him I needed to hear that from you directly. My blood ran cold. Trevor was laying groundwork, creating a narrative. That weekend, Trevor made another unusual request. Mom, why don't you give Martha a week off? She works so hard. I can stay here and help out. We could use the time to bond like we used to. Martha had been with me for 15 years and had never taken more than a long weekend. She was also my most consistent daily contact, the person most likely to notice if something happened to me. I agreed to give Martha 4 days off but secretly asked her to check in by phone each evening. I also began keeping a small notebook documenting Trevor's concerning behavior. I wasn't ready to confront him or go to the authorities. He was still my son, and I had no proof of anything beyond inappropriate questions and suspicious timing. But the mother's intuition, I'd ignored for too long, was now screaming warnings I couldn't silence. January 15th dawned bright and brutally cold, with temperatures dipping below zero overnight. The kind of New England winter day, where the snow squeaks under your boots and your breath forms clouds that linger in the air. I remember thinking it was too cold to venture out, so I decided to catch up on paperwork at home. Trevor had been staying in his old room for 3 days supposedly, to help out while Martha was away. I was in my home office reviewing quarterly reports when Trevor appeared in the doorway with 2 steaming mugs of coffee. Thought you might need this, he said, setting one on my desk. You've been working for hours. I thanked him, touched by the gesture. For a moment, it felt like we were finding our way back to a healthy relationship. Actually, he said, leaning against the doorframe, I was thinking we could do some organizing in the basement freezer today. It's been ages since we did a proper inventory right. I noticed it's getting pretty full when I was grabbing ice cream last night. He was right. The commercial freezer in my test kitchen basement was overdue for a clean-out. I'd been storing excess supplies for the restaurants there, along with frozen test recipes and personal food. That's a great idea, I said, genuinely pleased by his initiative. Let me finish this report and we can head down in about an hour. Trevor nodded. I'll get some inventory sheets ready. Maybe we could make a list of what to keep and what to toss. As I turned back to my computer, I caught a glimpse of something in his expression, a flicker of calculation that sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the freezing temperatures outside. But I dismissed it. He was my son, my only child. Surely I was being paranoid. Around noon, we made our way to the basement. The test kitchen gleamed with professional stainless steel appliances, the pride of my home. The freezer stood against the far wall, its heavy insulated door securely latched. I'll open it up and start pulling things out, Trevor said, moving toward the freezer. You can check expiration dates and make notes. I nodded and picked up the clipboard he'd prepared. As Trevor swung open the heavy door, cold air billowed out in a white cloud. The interior light illuminated rows of shelves stocked with frozen meats, containers of sauces, and test batches of desserts. Why don't you go in and check the dates on those containers in the back? Trevor suggested. I can barely reach them. Without thinking twice, I stepped into the freezer. The temperature inside was set at exactly 0 degrees standard for commercial food storage. I moved toward the back shelves, my breath visible in the cold air. I was examining a container of frozen bouillabaisse when I heard it, the distinctive metallic thud of the freezer door closing behind me. At first I thought it was an accident. Trevor, I called, turning around. The door closed. Through the small window in the door, I saw Trevor's face. There was no surprise there, no concern, just cold determination as he deliberately flipped the external latch into the locked position. Panic surged through me as I rushed to the door, pounding on the thick insulated metal. "Trevor, the door's locked. Open it." "I can hear you, Mom," he said, his voice muffled but audible. He made no move toward the latch. "What are you doing?" I shouted, my hands already stinging from the cold metal of the door. "This isn't funny, open the door now." Trevor stepped closer to the window so I could see his face clearly. "I need the money, Mom. All of it. Not the allowance scraps you've been throwing me." The reality of what was happening hit me like a physical blow. My own son had deliberately locked me in a freezer. My own child was trying to kill me. "Trevor, please," I begged, my voice breaking. "Whatever is going on, we can figure it out together. Just open the door." "I owe some very dangerous people $300,000, he said, his voice eerily calm. "Gambling debts. They're not patient people, Mom. They've already broken 2 of my fingers as a warning." He held up his left hand, and for the first time, I noticed the splints on his index and middle fingers. How had I missed that? "I can help you with the debt," I said desperately. "We can work this out." "It's too late for that," Trevor replied. "And it's not just the debt. I need all of it. The house, the business, everything. You've made it clear you'll never just give it to me. This is the only way. People will know," I said, trying to reason with him through my growing fear. "The police will investigate." He shook his head. "No one's here. Martha's away. Robert thinks you're taking a personal day. By the time anyone finds you, it will look like you accidentally got trapped while checking inventory. A tragic accident. I'll be the grieving son who inherits everything." The methodical thought he'd put into this plan terrified me more than the cold already seeping into my bones. "You're my son," I said, my voice barely a whisper now. "I gave you life, and now you'll give me the life I deserve." He replied coldly, "Goodbye, Mom. If it helps, I'll make sure the restaurants keep your name." With that, he turned and walked away. I screamed and pounded on the door until my hands were numb, but he never looked back. I heard his footsteps on the stairs, then the distant sound of the basement door closing. I was alone in a freezer that would become my tomb if I couldn't find a way out. The initial panic that flooded through me was paralyzing. I pounded on the door until my hands were bruised and raw, screaming until my voice gave out. The cold was already seeping through my clothing, a light sweater and slacks that offered little protection against the punishing 0°F temperature. "Think, Estelle, think," I told myself, forcing my mind to push past the terror. I knew that in freezing temperatures, panic would only speed up hypothermia. I needed to stay calm and focused. First, I took inventory of my surroundings. The freezer was approximately 8 feet wide, 6 feet deep, and 7 feet high. Steel shelving units lined 3 walls loaded with frozen food in various containers. The floor was stainless steel, painfully cold through the thin soles of my house slippers. The door had a small window about 5 inches square that allowed me to see a sliver of the basement beyond. There was an interior light, thankfully, so I wasn't in darkness. And most importantly, I knew this freezer inside and out. I had selected it, had it installed, and used it regularly. My first priority was to try to find anything that could help me either break out or signal for help. I began methodically searching through the freezer's contents, my fingers already stiffening from cold. On the middle shelf, I found a metal ice cream scoop with a pointed handle. Next to it was a box cutter I'd left in there after opening a shipment of meat. Not much, but better than nothing. I also found several empty metal containers that had once held bulk ice cream. These could be useful for making noise. As I searched, I tried to fight the effects of the cold. I kept moving, doing small jumps and exercises to generate body heat. But I could feel my core temperature dropping dangerously. My movements were becoming sluggish, and a treacherous drowsiness was creeping in, the first warning sign of hypothermia. I remembered reading that snow can act as insulation for people trapped in avalanches. Looking around, I realized the frozen food could serve a similar purpose. I began rearranging the containers of frozen soup and sauce, creating a small barrier around a corner of the freezer where I could huddle for minimal protection. Then I remembered something critical. My phone was in my pocket. With trembling hands, I pulled it out. The screen lit up, showing a nearly full battery, but as expected, no signal in this metal box. Still, it was something. The flashlight function could be used for heat, however minimal, and if I could somehow boost the signal, I climbed onto the lowest shelf, phone raised high, desperately seeking even a single bar of reception. Nothing. The freezer was essentially a Faraday cage blocking all signals. But the phone had another use, keeping track of time. I'd been trapped for 45 minutes already. As the first hour passed, a dangerous calm began to settle over me. The cold wasn't as painful anymore, a very bad sign. I forced myself to remember Jack's battle with cancer, how he fought until the very end despite excruciating pain. "You're a fighter too, Estelle," I told myself aloud, my words visible as puffs of vapor in the freezing air. Then I noticed something I'd overlooked. Near the ceiling, partially obscured by a tall box of frozen pastries, was a small ventilation duct. All commercial freezers have these to prevent vacuum pressure from building when the door closes. This one was only about 3 inches in diameter, far too small for escape, but perhaps large enough to project sound. I carefully stacked several plastic containers to create a makeshift step ladder. Standing on my tiptoes atop this wobbly platform, I could just reach the vent. I cleared away the frost that had accumulated around it and peered through. It led to a narrow duct that presumably connected to the outside of the unit. Grabbing one of the metal ice cream containers, I positioned it beneath the vent and began striking it rhythmically with the ice cream scoop, creating a loud metallic clanging. I alternated this with shouting for help through the vent, though my voice was growing weaker. 3 hours had passed, according to my phone. My extremities were now completely numb, and alarming patches of white had appeared on my fingers, the beginning of frostbite. The drowsiness was overwhelming, and each time I closed my eyes, it became harder to open them again. I thought of Trevor, my beautiful baby boy, who had once looked at me with such love. Where had I gone wrong? What pain or emptiness inside him had I failed to see? Even as I fought to survive, my heart ached with this deeper wound. The knowledge that my only child saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to wealth. Just as my hope was fading, I remembered the small flashlight I kept in the freezer for power outages. It was in a toolkit on the bottom shelf. With the last of my strength, I retrieved it and positioned it directly beneath the ventilation duct, pointing upward. Then I continued my rhythmic banging on the metal container, flashing the light in sync with the noise. SOS, SOS, SOS. The universal distress signal became my mantra as consciousness began to slip away. My last coherent thought before the darkness closed in was of Jack. "I'm sorry, my love," I whispered. I tried. I don't know exactly how long I was unconscious. The next thing I remember is the sound of the freezer door being wrenched open and a scream of horror. "Mrs. Blackwood! Oh my God, Mrs. Blackwood!" Martha's voice penetrated the fog that had enveloped my mind. I felt myself being dragged across the freezer floor out into the relative warmth of the basement. Every movement sent spikes of agony through my frozen limbs as circulation painfully returned. "Call 911. Martha was shouting into her phone. "Hurry, she's barely breathing." Through half-closed eyes, I could see Martha's terrified face hovering over mine as she wrapped me in blankets she'd pulled from a nearby storage closet. Trevor. I managed to croak, my voice a barely audible rasp. "Don't try to talk," Martha soothed, rubbing my arms and legs through the blankets to generate warmth. "The ambulance is coming. You're going to be okay." I slipped in and out of consciousness as paramedics arrived, loaded me onto a stretcher, and rushed me to Boston Memorial Hospital. My core body temperature had dropped to 82 degrees Celsius. Severe hypothermia that could have been fatal had Martha not found me when she did. Later, Martha explained what had happened. She had finished her errands earlier than expected and decided to drop by the house to pick up a book she'd left behind. When she entered, she heard a faint metallic clanging coming from the basement. Following the sound, she discovered the locked freezer and my desperate signals for help. I had been trapped for nearly 5 hours by the time she rescued me. Recovery was slow and painful. Hypothermia had affected my heart rhythm, and the doctors were concerned about potential organ damage. Frostbite on my fingers and toes required specialized treatment. But I was alive, and with each passing hour, my mind became clearer. I knew what Trevor had done. I remembered every word he'd said before leaving me to die. But as I lay in that hospital bed, a plan began to form in my mind. When Trevor burst into my hospital room the following morning, he played the part of the concerned son perfectly. His eyes were red, as though he'd been crying, and his voice shook with what anyone else would have interpreted as worry. "Mom!" he exclaimed, rushing to my bedside and taking my hand. "I came as soon as Martha called." "What happened? How did you end up in the freezer?" I looked at my son, studying the face I had loved since the moment he was born. Behind his mask of concern, I could see the calculation in his eyes. He was trying to determine if I remembered what he'd done, if I would expose him. That's when I made a split-second decision that would change everything. I would give Trevor exactly what he feared most, and exactly what he deserved. "Trevor," I said weakly, my voice deliberately confused. "Is that you? Where am I?" Surprise flickered across his face, quickly replaced by what looked like relief. "You're in the hospital, Mom. Don't you remember what happened?" I furrowed my brow in apparent confusion. "No, everything's fuzzy. The doctor said something about a freezer. You were trapped in the basement freezer." Trevor explained, his voice now soothing, almost patronizing. "Martha found you. The doctor said hypothermia can cause temporary memory loss. You probably went in to get something and the door accidentally closed behind you." I widened my eyes in false shock. How awful, I don't remember any of it. The last thing I remember is breakfast, I think, with you. Trevor nodded eagerly. "Yes, we had breakfast yesterday morning. I had to go out for a meeting afterward." The lie came so easily to him. When I came back, the ambulance was already there. "Thank goodness for Martha," I said, squeezing his hand. "And for you being here now." The relief on Trevor's face was unmistakable. He thought he'd gotten away with attempted murder, that his mother's convenient memory loss had handed him a second chance. What he didn't know was that I remembered everything. Every word, every cold calculation, every moment of betrayal. And while he thought I was a helpless victim, I was already planning how to turn the tables. After Trevor left, I asked the nurse to contact my attorney, Susan Goldman. When she arrived later that afternoon, I gave her very specific instructions. "I need to change my will immediately," I told her. "And I need you to set up a meeting with Detective James Reynolds from the Boston Police Department. Tell him it's regarding an attempted murder. My attempted murder." Susan's eyes widened. "Estelle, what happened?" "I'll explain everything to both of you together," I said. "But first, I need your word that you'll follow my instructions exactly, even if you don't agree with them." Susan nodded solemnly. "Of course. You know I've always had your back." Over the next 2 days, I remained in the hospital, playing the role of the confused, memory-impaired mother whenever Trevor visited. Meanwhile, I was documenting everything, working with Detective Reynolds to build a case and completely restructuring my will and business holdings. By the time I was released from the hospital 4 days later, every piece of my plan was in place. Trevor insisted I stay at his apartment until I felt better, but I firmly declined returning to my own home with Martha, keeping a watchful eye on me. "Are you sure about this?" Detective Reynolds asked during our final meeting before I left the hospital. "We have enough evidence to arrest him now. You don't have to confront him yourself." I shook my head. "I need to do this my way. He's still my son, and I need him to understand the full impact of what he's done and what he's lost." The detective reluctantly agreed to my plan, with the condition that officers would be nearby ready to intervene if necessary. 1 week after my release from the hospital, I invited Trevor to dinner at my home. Just the two of us, I told him over the phone. I've been doing a lot of thinking about the future while I was recovering. There are some things we need to discuss. Of course, Mom, he replied, the eagerness in his voice poorly disguised. He still believed I had no memory of his betrayal. He still believed he had a clear path to my fortune. He was about to learn how wrong he was. I spent the entire day preparing for this confrontation. Martha helped me cook Trevor's favorite meal, prime rib with rosemary roasted potatoes, and Jack's famous creamed spinach recipe. The dining room table was set with our best china and crystal wine glasses. To anyone looking in from the outside, it would appear to be a loving family dinner. But appearances can be deceiving, as my son had so painfully taught me. Detective Reynolds and two other officers were positioned in unmarked cars within sight of the house. My phone was set to record hidden in my apron pocket. And most importantly, my new legal documents were ready in my study, waiting to be revealed at the right moment. Trevor arrived at 7 p.m. sharp, a bottle of expensive Cabernet in hand. "You look so much better, Mom," he said, kissing my cheek. "Almost back to your old self." "I feel better," I replied with a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "Come in, dinner's almost ready." We made small talk as I finished the meal preparations. Trevor told me about a new investment opportunity he was exploring carefully, avoiding any mention of his gambling debts or the dangerous people he owed money to. I nodded and asked appropriate questions, all while watching the subtle tells in his body language. The way he couldn't quite meet my eyes, the nervous tapping of his fingers against the wine glass. When we sat down to dinner, Trevor raised his glass in a toast. "To your health and recovery, Mom. You gave us quite a scare." I clinked my glass against his. "To new beginnings," I responded. "And to truth." Something in my tone must have alarmed him, because his smile faltered slightly. "Truth. Yes," I said, taking a sip of wine. "I've been doing a lot of thinking during my recovery. About life, about what matters, about loyalty and betrayal." Trevor shifted in his seat, his discomfort becoming more visible. "That sounds pretty philosophical for a family dinner. Does it?" I asked, cutting into my prime rib with deliberate precision. "I suppose near-death experiences have a way of clarifying one's thinking." "Mom, the doctor said not to dwell on the accident. It's not good for your recovery." I looked directly into my son's eyes. "But it wasn't an accident, was it, Trevor?" The color drained from his face. "What do you mean?" "I remember everything," I said quietly. "Every word you said before you locked me in that freezer and left me to die. Every detail of your plan to inherit my money to pay off your gambling debts." Trevor's fork clattered against his plate. For a moment he seemed frozen in shock. Then his expression shifted, calculating his best move. "Mom, that's crazy," he said with a nervous laugh. "The hypothermia must have caused some kind of hallucination or false memory. I would never." "Stop lying," I cut him off sharply. "I remember you showing me your broken fingers, telling me you owed dangerous people $300,000, saying you needed all of it, the house, the business, everything." Trevor's face hardened as he realized his charade was pointless. "You have no proof." "Actually, I do," I replied, pulling out my phone and playing back part of our conversation from earlier, where he'd mentioned his investment opportunity, the same language he'd used when asking for the $50,000 months ago. "I've been recording everything since you arrived, and I've given copies of my previous recordings and statements to the police." His eyes darted to the window, perhaps looking for an escape route. "You're bluffing. Detective Reynolds and his officers are outside right now," I said calmly. "One call from me, and you'll be arrested for attempted murder." Fear flashed across Trevor's face. "You wouldn't do that to your own son." "My own son wouldn't lock me in a freezer to die," I countered. "But you're right. I haven't called them in yet because I wanted to give you a choice." Trevor leaned forward, desperation in his eyes. What choice? I stood up and walked to my study, returning with a folder of documents. Option 1, I call Detective Reynolds right now. You're arrested and charged with attempted murder. With my testimony and evidence, you'll likely serve at least 20 years in prison. Trevor's hands were shaking now. And option 2. Option 2 is more complicated, I said, spreading the documents on the table. I've already changed my will. You are no longer my heir to anything. The restaurants will go into a trust managed by Robert, with profits going to a foundation supporting victims of domestic violence. You can't do that, Trevor exploded, his face contorted with rage. I'm your son, your only family. Family doesn't try to kill family, I replied evenly. But I'm giving you a chance at redemption. A chance your father would have wanted me to give you. I pointed to a document titled Treatment Agreement. You will check into the Lakeside Rehabilitation Center tomorrow morning for gambling addiction treatment. The minimum stay is 90 days. After that, assuming you complete the program successfully, you will work at one of my restaurants, starting in the dishwashing station and working your way up. No special treatment. Trevor's face twisted in disgust. You expect me to wash dishes like some like someone who needs to learn the value of honest work, I interrupted. You will live in the apartment above the downtown restaurant. Your salary will be normal for your position. No extras. 30% of your pay will go toward restitution to me. This is humiliating, Trevor hissed. It's a second chance, I corrected him, which is more than you gave me. Trevor stood up abruptly, knocking his chair backward. You think you can control me with this? You've always tried to control me. Maybe if you and Dad hadn't been so focused on your precious restaurants instead of me, I wouldn't have turned out this way. The accusation stung, but I didn't flinch. Your father and I gave you everything, Trevor. Maybe that was our mistake. But blaming us for your choices stops today. I'll contest the will, he threatened. I'll tell everyone you're mentally unstable after the freezer incident. I smiled sadly. I've had 3 separate psychological evaluations in the past week, all confirming my mental competence. And my new will includes a contest clause. If you challenge it, you get nothing, not even this second chance. What about the people I owe money to? He asked, his voice smaller now. They'll come after me. The debt will be paid directly to them from a separate fund I've established, contingent upon your successful completion of rehab and 6 months of work, I explained. You'll get a clean slate, but you'll have to earn everything after that. Trevor stared at me for a long moment, his face cycling through a range of emotions: anger, fear, calculation, and finally defeat. So those are my only options: prison or becoming your indentured servant. Those are your options, I confirmed. And you need to decide now. Detective Reynolds is waiting for my call. Trevor sank back into his chair, head in his hands. For a brief moment, I saw a glimpse of the little boy who used to run to me with skinned knees looking for comfort. My heart ached, but I remained firm. Why are you even giving me a second chance? He finally asked, looking up with reddened eyes. After what I did? Because I'm your mother, I said simply. And because somewhere beneath all this, I believe there's still a good person. The person your father and I raised you to be. After what seemed like an eternity, Trevor reached for the pen I'd placed beside the documents. I'll take the rehab, he said quietly. But don't expect me to be grateful. I don't expect gratitude, I replied. I expect change. As Trevor signed the documents, I felt no triumph, only a profound sadness for what our relationship had become, and a cautious hope for what it might someday be again. The freezer had nearly taken my life, but it had given me something unexpected in return: the clarity to see the truth and the strength to face it head-on. 3 months have passed since that dinner with Trevor. The journey hasn't been easy for either of us, but there are small signs of progress that I hold on to, like precious gems. Trevor completed the 90-day rehabilitation program at Lakeside. His counselor told me he was resistant at first, but gradually began to participate in group therapy and one-on-one sessions. They diagnosed him not only with gambling addiction, but also with narcissistic personality traits that will require ongoing therapy. True to our agreement, Trevor moved into the small apartment above our downtown restaurant and began working in the dishwashing station. Robert, my operations manager, reports that Trevor has been punctual and hasn't complained about the work, at least not where customers can hear him. Last week, I visited the restaurant unannounced and observed Trevor from a distance. His hands were red from hot water, his forehead beaded with sweat as he worked through the lunch rush dishes. For a moment, our eyes met across the kitchen. He didn't smile, but he gave me a small nod before returning to his work. It wasn't forgiveness or reconciliation, but it was acknowledgement, a tiny bridge across the chasm between us. With the profits from two of my restaurants, I established the Blackwood Foundation for Survivors of Family Violence. We provide financial assistance, counseling, and housing support for people rebuilding their lives after abuse from family members. The foundation has already helped 37 survivors in our first quarter of operation. Martha still works for me though, now she's more companion than housekeeper. After my hospital stay, she insisted on moving from the guest house into a spare bedroom in the main house, just in case. I haven't had the heart to tell her I've added her to my will, leaving her the house and a significant trust fund. Some surprises are worth keeping. Robert has excelled as the operational trustee of the restaurant chain. Under his leadership, we've opened a sixth location and increased profits by 12%. He brings me weekly reports and often stays for dinner, filling the house with laughter I thought I might never hear again within these walls. My relationship with Trevor remains complicated. We meet for coffee every Sunday afternoon, neutral territory at a cafe halfway between my home and his apartment. Our conversations are stilted, focused mainly on his work and recovery. There are moments when I catch glimpses of genuine remorse in his eyes, but they're quickly masked by the defensive wall he's built around himself. I still struggle with guilt and self-recrimination. Where did Jack and I go wrong in raising our son? Should I have seen the warning signs earlier? Could I have prevented this by setting better boundaries when Trevor was young? My therapist reminds me that while parents influence their children's development, adults ultimately make their own choices. Trevor chose to value money over my life. That's a reality I have to live with, even as I hope for his redemption. The physical scars from my time in the freezer have mostly healed. I lost the tip of one finger to frostbite, and I still get unusual numbness in my toes during cold weather. The emotional scars run deeper. I've installed additional security in my home, including cameras and a panic button system. For weeks, I couldn't go into the basement without trembling. Eventually, I had the freezer removed entirely and donated to a food bank in another state. Recently, during one of our coffee meetings, Trevor asked me a question that caught me off guard. "Do you ever think you'll be able to forgive me?" He asked, his eyes fixed on his cup. I took a long moment before answering. "I'm working on it," I said finally. "Forgiveness isn't something I can force. It has to grow naturally like trust." "And trust?" he asked quietly. "That will take even longer," I admitted. But I'm not giving up hope. For the first time in our many coffee meetings, Trevor reached across the table and briefly touched my hand. "I don't deserve a second chance," he said. "Maybe not," I agreed. "But you have one anyway. What matters is what you do with it." The road ahead is long, and I don't know if Trevor and I will ever fully rebuild what was broken that day in the freezer. But I've learned that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the character we build. And sometimes the greatest act of love is letting someone face the consequences of their actions. As for me, I'm finding new joy in unexpected places. I've started teaching cooking classes for underprivileged youth. I'm writing a cookbook filled with Jack's and my favorite recipes. And I'm learning that family can be created, not just born. Through Martha, Robert, and the community I've built around myself. If there's one thing my experience has taught me, it's that we are stronger than we know until being strong is the only choice we have. In that freezer facing death, I found a resilience I never knew I possessed. In the aftermath, facing a broken relationship with my only child, I'm finding that same strength every day. And now I ask you, what would you have done in my place? When is it time to let go? And when is it time to hold on tighter? I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments below. If my story touched you in any way, please subscribe to hear more stories of survival and redemption. Hit the like button if you believe in second chances and share this video with someone who might need to be reminded of their own strength today. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, sometimes our deepest wounds become our greatest sources of healing.